I welcome you to my channel Learn with Pharmacy. In today's video lecture, we will see the term what is agonist and antagonist. So, before moving to the main term that is agonist and antagonist, we will see what is receptor. So, receptor are those binding site in which drug are attached and then activate it and gives a pharmacological or biological action. As in this figure, we can see when a drug binds to a receptor. This is the drug. When it binds to the receptor, it makes drug plus receptor complex which gives a biological action. But remember, single drug without receptor or single receptor without any drug will not be able to produce any biological action. For better understanding, we will take the example of lock and key mechanism. Lock key mechanism. In this, we will suppose key as drug and lock as receptor. So the single key, that is drug, is useless without lock, means receptor, and single lock, that is receptor, which is unoccupied without key, means drug, that will be useless. So here, to show the proper action, there must be complex formation of key and lock, that is drug and receptor complex. So here we can conclude that to show any pharmacological action, there must be complex formation of drug and receptor. Moving to the main term, that is agonist. An agonist is a chemical which binds to a receptor and activates the receptor to produce a biological response. As in the figure, we can see this is the binding site. This is the binding site where the drug binds to a receptor. And activates the receptor to produce a biological response. So, generally on binding site in our body, the hormone secretion gets low. So, to increase that hormone secretion, we take drug. So, the drug binds to the receptor and activates the receptor and shows the pharmacological action. So, the receptor will be only activate when any endogenous agonist or exogenous agonist will bind to the receptor. So endogenous means inside the body, like hormone or neurotransmitter, etc. So they will bind to a receptor and will activate the receptor to show the pharmacological action. Or exogenous means the drug taken from outside the body. So if that drug will bind to the receptor on the binding site and activate the receptor, it will give the pharmacological action. So the next term, that is antagonist. These are the opposite of agonist, where in agonist the drug was binding at the receptor and activating the receptor, but in this case of antagonist, they bind at the binding site and inhibits or stop the pharmacological action. Example, in the case of acetylcholine, a hormone inside the body. In the case of acetylcholine is the hormone inside the body. If the secretion of acetylcholine increases, so in this case we will take antagonist. We will take antagonist, that is atropine. Atropine is the antagonist. Antagonist means same structure as agonist. As we can see in the figure, antagonist is having same structure as agonist. So antagonist will bind at the binding site, that is atropine. So acetylcholine will not able to bind on the binding side. So the hormone secretion will become normal inside the body. So basically there are two types of antagonism. First is competitive antagonism, that is also known as reversible antagonism. In competitive antagonism, as the name suggests, there is the competition between agonist and antagonist to bind on the same receptor. An antagonist bind with the receptor and prevent the agonist from binding and inhibiting a response to give the pharmacological action. Means there is the one receptor having one binding site for agonist as well as for antagonist. Now antagonist will bind with the receptor and that will prevent agonist from binding with the receptor, and that produces no action because already antagonist has been binding with the receptor. So this is known as competitive antagonism. It is also called as reversible antagonism because it is totally dependent on the concentration of agonist and antagonism. Means we can replace antagonist by agonist simply by increasing the concentration of agonist. Means if the concentration of agonist is increased, it will replace antagonist from the receptor. As in the figure we can see, now since agonist is in more concentration, so it will bind with the receptor and produces the pharmacological or biological action. That's why it is called as reversible antagonism. Second is non-competitive antagonism. It is also called as irreversible antagonism. In this type, agonist and antagonist bind with different binding sites on the same receptor. Since binding sites are different, there is no competition for binding with the receptor. Antagonists bind with the receptor and bring changes in the structure of receptor. As a result, agonist can not bind with the receptor, so it will not be able to produce the pharmacological action. So such antagonism is called as non-competitive antagonism. As in the figure we can see, there is the receptor having two binding sites, one for antagonist and another for agonist. So now antagonist will bind with the receptor, and it brings the changes in the structure of receptor. As we can see between the both the receptor structure, it will bring, as the antagonist is binding with the receptor, it will bring changes in the structure of the receptor. Since structure is changed, agonist will not be able to bind with the receptor. It will prevent agonist from binding with the receptor. So it will produce no action. As the result, antagonist will not be able to prevent any action. So such antagonism is also called as non-competitive antagonism. It is irreversible because we cannot bring the structure of the receptor to its original shape. That's why it is called as irreversible antagonism. So hope you have understood the term agonist and antagonist with receptor. So like, share and subscribe to our channel Learn with Pharmacy. We will back with new term in next video. Thank you.